25% tariffs. That threat by Donald Trump is supposed to take effect at midnight. Several industries will be impacted, and that will be felt right here in Saskatchewan. The president of one of the largest economies in the world saying he doesn't need what we have. So where do we go from here? And what will be the impact on you and I? We'll be hearing from shoppers in Saskatoon.
I mean, costs are just going to go up. They're already quite high, I feel. Yeah, expecting them to go up, and we'll probably buy more Canadian products, and we'll see how prices go in the next couple of weeks at the grocery store, but we'll probably change some of my buying habits because of that.
Well, we'll also have the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan willing to take some of your questions because, let's face it, it is a confusing, uncertain time for all of us. Folks from L'Orange all the way to Lloydminster who are buying groceries or trying to buy a house, small business owners who rely on American parts. We want to hear from all of you. How worried are you about the tariffs? Have you already started making an effort to buy more Canadian products? Give us a shout today, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Premier Scott Moe addressed reporters at 11 o'clock today, so let's listen to some of what he had to say.
This is going to have an impact on our agricultural producers up and down the supply chain in the ag industry in Saskatchewan. It will have an impact on our miners up and down the supply chain as well, all of those involved in the mining industry, whatever the product might be, our oil and energy workers, as well as our retailers in our urban centers and in our communities across this province. This will have an impact, and I would implore on our federal government to work alongside the provinces as they have been, but to ensure they are always looking at options like we saw in Mexico this morning to have these tariffs removed, if it even is for a short period of time, so that we can further our engagement and further the integration and further the opportunity that we have to implore on one individual, President Trump, that seems bent on using these tariffs in some way, shape, or form to destabilize the investment environment that we have in North America, to destabilize the energy and food security that we have been able to acquire in North America over the course of the last number of decades and maybe even a century, and the significant role that Saskatchewan plays in this. And again, I would just say that everything that we do as leaders, political leaders, business leaders, community leaders, needs to be focused on the long term. It needs to be focused on de-escalating the conversation around imposing tariffs on one another, de-escalating the conversation around harmfully reducing the opportunity that we have in that strong, growing, and vibrant North American economy, and focusing on ensuring that these tariffs are removed as soon as possible, like it appears they may have been for a period of time in Mexico this morning. So, with that, I'd open it up to any questions. Phil?
Yeah, can you clarify your position on, we now see retaliatory, Canada's plan for retaliatory tariffs. We've seen other provinces take U.S. liquor off the shelves. I know the regime here is different than what we see in Ontario, Manitoba, Quebec, elsewhere.
Yeah.
What do you think are you for no retaliatory tariffs whatsoever? And what do you think specifically? I mean, you are still the wholesaler for liquor here. So what do you think about that? Yeah,
and so there's some provinces that are making specific decisions, whether it be on things like liquor that's available in their publicly owned stores, public systems that we have in various provinces, as well as procurement. There's other provinces making decisions around procurement. We're looking at what opportunities Saskatchewan might have in that space. Not to say that we would act on any of those non-tariff or retaliatory measures. However, we are looking at what opportunities we might have that could go under consideration. Again, I've been very clear when it comes to tariffs of any kind, whether they be retaliatory tariffs, counter tariffs, or whether they be the initial tariffs that are imposed by President Trump. They're harmful to everyone that lives in North America. The small suite are growing now. First instance of retaliatory or counter tariffs that the federal government has imposed has grown from its original iteration, and unfortunately is necessary. Unfortunately, it is necessary. If we find ourselves in a broad tariff war or trade war where everything that is flowing north and south is subject to tariffs, Canadians will lose that. We are an exporting province and we are an exporting nation. And we should not be heading that direction. That should not be the goal, and we should not be openly discussing what that might look like, because the goal and the focus and everything that we do needs to be heading exactly the other direction, where we are removing the tariffs that could potentially be imposed, whether they be President Trump's tariffs or the counter tariffs that have even been proposed by our Canadian government. So we unfortunately do support the first suite of counter tariffs that have been introduced. Looking at the second list that is there, are not supportive in any way of export tariffs that would be tariffing, whether that be electricity coming out of Manitoba, Quebec, into the U.S., or whether that be energy or potash products that are coming out of our province or Alberta. And most certainly, I think we have, if this is the case in what has happened between the President Trump and his administration this morning and the President of Mexico, where their tariffs have been granted a 30-day reprieve due to placing a number of military personnel along the border. We have that opportunity as well, and it was a suggestion that I had brought forward a number of weeks ago.
So you would consider something with, say, alcohol, that I know might be more symbolic than it is actually?
Yeah, a few $1 million in the scope of what, the broader North American economy is probably at its core not going to change a lot. However, there is Tennessee and Kentucky bourbon on the list of original counter tariffs for a reason. If you are able to make moves in certain areas that do change the hearts and minds of decision makers, policy makers in the U.S. This has proven to be not the only thing that is effective, but to have some effect going back to the disputes that we've had when it comes to country of origin labeling over a decade ago. I was been on the phone as recently as this morning with a number of steel manufacturers, both north and south of the border, and we've faced a similar discussion not that many years ago under the previous Trump administration when it comes to steel and aluminum tariffs. And so this is not new ground for us having these discussions. However, what we're discussing today is much broader, deeper, and will have a much more significant impact on North American families and the jobs that are created by investing in the North American economy.
So that is Premier Scott Moe. With me in studio is Keith Willoughby, the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan. Welcome back to the show, Keith.
Good afternoon, Leisha. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so listening along there to Premier Scott Moe, before I ask you my questions, just what stood out to you immediately?
I think the uncertainty with which we are currently existing as a province, as a country, dealing with these escalation of tariffs, and recognizing that even as of this morning, what President Trump has decided to do with Mexico, and whether a reprieve of tariffs for 30 days might be on the books for a Canadian situation. So this situation literally changing hour by hour as we're proceeding through these events.
You can see how each premier is taking a bit of a different approach, and Premier Scott Moe's wording there was, we need to de-escalate this situation, not escalate it. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective as someone who really studies and analyzes this stuff, what is the best way to respond to these tariffs? Like, maybe talk me through some of the different options available to Canada right now. Obviously, there are retaliatory tariffs, and some people say that will damage the economy even further. But what are the scenarios that you could walk us through? I
think probably at least three scenarios, Leisha, that we might be able to explore as a province here. One is complete retaliatory tariffs, which would be a complete opportunity for us to respond to what the United States has done, to issue a wide sweeping set of tariffs that would impact the United States importing from Canada. That has obviously advantages in terms of sending a very loud signal. The challenge, though, is where does it stop in terms of the retaliatory nature of the tariffs? Does one, as Premier Moe said, as you continue this escalation route, eventually things could get to a position where it could be really challenging for all. The challenge with the retaliatory trade-offs is inflation is going to impact everybody, and everybody ends up the worse. I often use the phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth makes everyone short-sighted and needs a trip to the dentist. So we're all going to suffer from there.
I do want to ask you, though, more about some provinces pulling U.S. alcohol, because there wasn't Scott Moe didn't announce something in that press conference. He didn't say, we're going to do this to get back at the U.S. He sure talked about the border and whatnot. But were you looking for some, for a clear message from Premier Scott Moe on what we want to do next?
I think the message is, given the uncertainty, perhaps government officials in this part of the country trying to recognize that a full-scale escalation of tariffs could be an unwise situation. Now, he did mention a few products, but I think the message that really came through to me was, let's continue to talk, continue to negotiate, talk to business leaders in this country and the United States to be able to raise a voice that might help to pivot the President of the United States' perspective on this situation.
How unique of a situation are we in Saskatchewan in terms of what we provide for the world? So oil, uranium, potash. If we have most of that, can we use that as a leveraging tool, or do we risk damaging those industries even more?
Excellent question, Leisha. I would say that we have a very positive position here as a resource-rich province and as a resource-rich country. We are an exporting nation and an exporting province. The fact of our production of canola and uranium, of oil and agricultural products positions us in a very positive situation. Now, the fact of the matter is, again, we are a leading export province in the nation. However, we do have diversified markets, which is important for us to recognize that the United States is a major player for us, but not the only player that we have. When I look at the entire Canadian perspective, and I saw over the weekend where the president de-escalated the tariffs on oil down to 10%, 1 in 5 barrels of oil in the United States comes from Canada. We are a major supplier of crude oil, which is an oil that the United States needs. So I think that position can be positive for us to recognize that they, being the United States, need us in this particular venue.
We have several people who want to get in on the conversation, so this is your chance to ask some questions, to share with us what you're concerned about. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Let's get to it. So on the phone right now is James in Saskatoon. Hello, James.
Hi, Alicia. My concerns go to, well, there's a couple things. One is taxes, because I look at what this is going to affect. About 40% of the cost of construction in Canada is materials. So for all municipal, provincial, and federal construction projects, that cost is going to go up. And for things like the library in Saskatoon, which is already out of the ground, there are going to be cost overruns because of these tariffs. And how is that going to affect my tax bill? There's going to be increased costs to our medical system because, or to healthcare, because not only food but equipment comes from the States. That's going to be under tariffs. So one aspect is how much are our taxes going to go up because of this? The other thing is that in Canada we have about 1.25 million workers who are members of international unions, and they represent about 25% of our unionized workforce in Canada. Now, I would suggest that those unionized workers, because they work in construction, they work in healthcare, they're going to be directly affected by this, by discontinued projects or wage pressure, downward wage pressure because of other costs. I think that those unions, those union executives, those union leaders in Canada should be on the phone to their head offices in the States and telling them to get Trump to back down on this.
James, thanks for calling. A few good points and some questions there that we can put to you, Keith. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but the worry that any project that's started could be stalled or discontinued, and construction as an example, and then how might that affect our property taxes and all of that. Just unpack that a bit for us.
I think the key point that James raised is the notion of inflation, that if you look at tariffs that are produced anywhere in the world, economists generally agree that they lead to inflation. And so James is exactly correct. I think that's the underlying the feeling with people. If there is any certainty in this very, very, very uncertain environment, it's the fact that you and I and everybody else is going to pay more. And I think that's the challenge. We've been through a 5-year roller coaster ride of the pandemic, supply chain, interest rates, and inflation. Is this now another manifestation of inflationary challenges on an economy that's really been, I think, has a population, we've been bobbing and weaving for the past 5 years. So the point is exactly correct in terms of projects that may be at a standstill or inflationary pressures that are going to be paid. When there's a tariff, it's a tax. And it's a tax collected by governments and trade departments on the exchange of goods between nations. Somebody's got to pay the tax, and that somebody is you and me.
Well, focusing on the construction industry for just a moment, because I think people are wondering what will happen to projects, what this will do to housing prices. Our colleagues from Saskatoon Morning did speak with Shannon Friesen, who's CEO of the Construction Association of Saskatchewan, and here's how the tariffs could impact that industry.
Yeah, but like many of our other partners and sectors across Canada, we have grave concern about this tariff. The construction industry, of course, is reliant on certain products like aluminum, copper, lumber, all of those things that, of course, have the tariff coming across. And then, we're concerned about the retaliatory tariffs as well, which will just, put a lot of pain and suffering on both sides of the border, price escalation, volatility, those kinds of things up and down the supply chain. So yes, grave concern.
Give us an idea of what the construction industry imports or exports to the U.S.
Yeah, so, mostly, like I said, there's some products that we have in Canada, and we're concerned about, those products having less competitive edge in international markets. But we do rely on, specific equipment and things that we maybe get from the States right now in our industry, like HVAC and certain equipment that we know that will, drive up costs and up and down the chain and really put some strain on our projects. And so where that plays out is projects that are maybe already underway. We have contracts in place between owners and contractors and suppliers, and maybe they don't have clauses in there for project overruns and cost escalations. And before you know it, you have all kinds of projects being stalled or canceled, which impacts the employment sector and the labor force. So it's a significant concern when construction contributes over 6% to the provincial GDP. So that's $4.5 billion worth of impact for our province.
Shannon Friesen, CEO of the Construction Association of Saskatchewan, hearing how intertwined we are with the U.S. Keith, can you speak to that a bit, just how tangled up we are with the United States?
There is no situation like this in the world when you compare the Canada and the U.S. in terms of the interconnectivity of trade, of trading partners. We share a common border. We are two countries with incredibly large land masses. We are countries that obviously the United States dwarfs us in terms of population. We've got a lot of rich resources. We're looking at $500 billion of export goods that pass between Canada and the U.S. annually. And so the interconnectivity of trade has been there for decades.
And some goods go back and forth multiple times. Like if you just look at the auto industry, I couldn't believe how many times it might cross the border before it ends up being a car that's sold in Canada.
Exactly. In terms of the fabrication, raw materials, in terms of component supply, component assembly, we've shared for decades this I see this peaceful coexistence, this wonderful synergy between countries that are natural allies. I think the concern and uncertainty right now is this allyship being threatened. Are we now in a situation where we are in unprecedented territory? We have had tariff disputes before. Premier Moe referred to the 2018 situation of steel and aluminum that were eventually settled by the World Trade Organization. But again, this is wide sweeping, at least in its early stages in terms of the tariff structure, the amount of tariffs, and the impact it might have.
I've heard people use words like devastating, catastrophic, like some really strong language used to describe the impact of this.
And especially when you pivot this on the last 5 years. And again, not that we always want to be talking about, well, here's the pandemic or the supply chain challenges, but as a globe, we've gone through 5 years of uncharted territory in terms of pandemic issues. We've seen in our own nation over the last few years interest rates and inflation that reach generational high levels that we haven't seen for a long time. Is this now another tip of the iceberg that could really be problematic and destructive for economies and for people here in this province.
I know people are trying to do what they can, and so there really was this swell of support for Canadian products over the weekend, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And we have more callers on the line who want to share their thoughts and ask a few questions. So we'll get to that in a moment. You are listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio 1. Give us a call and tell us how you're feeling about the tariffs. 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Let's go to another caller. David is on the line in Saskatoon. Hello there, David.
Hi, Alicia. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. What are your thoughts?
Hello. Well, I agree with everything that I've heard so far, except that we are dealing with a very unreasonable person, somebody who's not really sane. He's not an economist. He's just trying to be cruel and punishing countries like Mexico and Canada. So I think when I listen to the Premier, I think I'd like to see him get on the front foot a little bit more. He wants to be nice about it and all the rest of it. I don't think that's going to make any difference. But we do have some tools we can use. I think potash is an excellent tool we can use. There's very little potash in the United States. They get about, I think, 85% of it from Canada. And that would really impact farming throughout the United States, and I think we should do something about that with potash. I'm not a keen fan of Premier Ford in Ontario, but I sure like the stuff he's doing, where he's canceling contracts with U.S. companies that are dealing with the province and so on, including Starlink with Elon Musk, and I think that's a great thing to do. But all of the things that have been said are true. Prices are going to go up. Unemployment's going to rise. Projects are going to cost more. Regardless of what we do, that is going to happen. So I guess we just got to buckle up and get ready for it.
Yeah, but interesting for you to say that you see potash as a tool. I'll ask Keith about that. David, thanks for calling.
Okay, Alicia. Bye-bye.
Bye. That's David in Saskatoon. That's David's perspective, that potash could be used as a tool. What do you think, Keith?
To a certain extent, yes. I think potash gives us an opportunity here where it's an important commodity within the agricultural sector. And as we feed the world, which is, I think, a wonderful strategy that we have here as a province with our potash industry, that can be used as an opportunity for us.
And in what way? And maybe this is a dumb question, but could we withhold potash? Would we put a tariff on it? Like what might that look like?
And what it might look like is excessively high tariffs to really try. If we look at sort of the rather than broad sweeping retaliatory trade-offs, if there are counter tariffs or targeted tariffs, specifically on potash, could that then impact the fertilizer market in terms of the United States? Could that impact their opportunity to grow food for their people and beyond? That could be an opportunity for us. I think the challenge when you get into these geopolitical and economic structures and situations is understanding there's risk involved. This isn't like playing a computer game where you can simply turn it off or press Control-Alt-Delete and start again. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with real people. And as David said, we're dealing with people who have their own agendas, who are dealing obviously with issues that they feel are important. And that's the challenge and the risk involved. You don't want to jeopardize future circumstances and situations because, again, we rely upon exports for the richness of this province, for our people, for jobs, for our economy to grow. So how do you balance the ability to send a message along with ensuring that you can be not jeopardizing any future situations?
So do you think politicians here are crossing their fingers and their toes that this may not take effect? I mean, in some ways, you look at what happened with Mexico, and theirs have been paused for a month. So do you think people are holding their breath, hoping it won't happen, or what do you think?
Excellent point, Alicia, and I would agree with you. I think if there's a glimmer of light in a really dark, uncertain world that we've seen over the past couple of days, the Mexico situation as of this morning could be that glimmer for us. The perspective I hear from listening to most political leaders in the country is one of trying to send a message, trying to be to de-escalate, trying to ensure that our voices are heard with government and business leaders and the population of the United States, but not really pushing that button in terms of being complete retaliatory yet.
Were you surprised that Premier Scott Moe focused so much on the border? I know that that's what President Donald Trump is saying the reason is for these tariffs is because of our uncontrolled borders. And a lot of critics have said, well, that's like, how do we even fight that? Like, that's not entirely the truth. Like, we don't have the issues that Trump is saying we do. But yet Scott Moe really focused on that he wants to see border security strengthened.
And maybe the rationale there is to mimic what Mexico did in terms of being able to get a 30-day tariff reprieve. I'm not an expert in terms of immigration between countries from one to the next, but I would suggest that from United States to Canada may not have the same level of experience and circumstances as United States to Mexico. So maybe it's a way of showing that we are listening, that we're doing something. But at the end of the day, should President Trump continue on this path of complete tariffs that are wide-sweeping in their nature, we're going to need to see something beyond mere words from government and business leaders in this country. We'll need to see action in terms of what can we do next.
So getting back to potash then, Diane sent an email. At least one of the companies that mine potash in Saskatchewan is American. So would tariffs affect it?
Good question. I'm not certain in terms of how that would impact it, but I think more to the emailer's point, it shows the interconnectivity of trade here where there are, again, a very prominent company that's situated in Canada that does have its base in the U.S. So
which company are we talking about?
We think of Mosaic.
Mosaic, okay.
That would have that. Again, it just shows that we are two nations that almost completely dominate an entire continent. We're large in landmass, and we've shared this opportunity of growth for decades. It's sad, I guess, being a citizen of this country, it's sort of sad to see this situation now begin to have this turbulence that could really be unwieldy for the people of this country.
Could we see companies move their head office to the U.S.? Would that be beneficial for them at this point?
Could be. I think everything right now is on the table.
Yeah.
When you think of the uncertainty that we're facing and the risks and the challenges, that would not be out of the realm of possibility. To me, that would be a situation, were it to happen, where you've got companies that are based in Saskatchewan that now head back to the U.S., I think that would be an outcome that would be disadvantageous, obviously, for jobs, for employment. It also sends a visible signal that the country, the province, is maybe no longer available for the opportunities that would have had otherwise. So I hope, again, as a citizen of the province, that we don't get to that stage, but that would be, to me, a real drastic indicator of some tensions that are growing in this trade war and dispute.
Yeah. Diane, the second paragraph in her email writes, on another point, when the first North American Free Trade Agreement was developed in the 1980s, critics predicted something like this could happen. Canada would lose economic independence and capacity to be self-sufficient. Here we are. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the notion of self-sufficiency is an interesting one. I think what I see is this codependence, this integrated dependence that we have has especially nations between us and the United States, where 3/4 of our exports go to the U.S. They need us, yes, for exports. We also need them. And in fact, we need the rest of the world in terms of access to supplies, access to finished goods. I think what we're seeing...
And do we? Because there might be people, and maybe it's slightly naive, but... Do we need other countries? Could we sustain ourselves in Saskatchewan? There are people who would make that argument.
We could.
Or are we past that point of being able to do that?
That would require a tremendous investment in infrastructure, in capital, in the ability to have manufacturing and fabrication plants. It also then could increase the cost of the final consumer. And I think right now, given the inflationary pressures we've seen over the last few years, I think inflation is something that's high in the mind of all Canadians, and especially people in Saskatchewan. I don't know if we really want to go that road anymore.
Let's go to another caller. So Perry is on the line in Prince Albert. Hello there, Perry.
Hi. Yeah, there's so many different ways of approaching this topic, so I'm just going to stick to the one I originally wanted to, is a prime example of what Trump is, again, as everybody calls him, a bully, but he's also a businessman. And he's maybe not very tactful in how he does his approach to business with other political countries. However, the point being is Mexico is getting a reprieve because they're stepping up to the border. Two things Canada needs to do. Number one is we had such a loose border policy that we got all kinds of people floating in and out of our country that Trudeau should have stopped. Trump is saying stop this flow of immigrants or migrants, illegal flow of it.
Because I think people would challenge you on that, and for sure, the Biden administration had concerns with our immigration policies. But go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
That's his argument, though. That is his argument. So if we take it at face value, which I don't know if we can, if we stepped up to the border and do what we need to do is increase our military spending, put our military into action instead of defunding them, get more military out there, make a part of the military's training a part of the Border Patrol. Then we've stepped up to our NATO targets. That's one thing resolved. Number two is we got our borders secured, and the amount of money we're going to spend on bringing our military up to snuff is certainly not going to be the $120 billion that Trudeau's prepared to throw money around like he did with CERB. And God knows a lot of that money ended up going to people that were registered as dead, and they're never going to get that money back. So it just shows you that if you're going to throw $120 billion and sink Canada into further debt, like an enormous amount of further debt, why not take just a fraction of that, increase our military spending, show Trump that our borders are going to be secure or mostly secure.
My question for you, Perry, and I just want to jump in for a sec, because my question for you in that is, what if that's still not enough? What if that doesn't convince Trump that we could do plenty, and he may still implement these tariffs? And so then my follow-up question for you is, how important is it for you to buy local at this point?
Well, okay, that is a very good point. And if he doesn't, if it's just a bluff for him, we've increased our military spending, so we're back up to NATO standards. That's a positive, so we win there. And if we got to deal with this tariff thing, we're going to have to buy more local. And consequently, the provinces have been arguing back and forth for years. We need more free trade within our own country, and we don't have that. So we need less restriction from the federal government. Like, we've had a terrible federal government in the last few years. And, I mean, throwing another $100 billion at this is just going to put us so far in the hole, there's no way we're going to ever get out of that.
Just so that I'm clear, because I want to ask a follow-up question to Keith. When you're talking about some of those dollar figures, are you talking about support for businesses that may need some relief because of this tariff? Okay. Yeah. So similar to the pandemic response, and that did lead to some debt, and so you worry that could repeat itself?
Well, they're already promising they're going to throw 100 to 120 billion.
So I want to ask, I want to ask Keith about that, because I mean that will be the next chapter of this story, is just how does the federal government support struggling industries. So Perry, thanks for calling. You raised a lot of good points, and I appreciate that. I want to go to Keith next. That was Perry in Prince Albert. Keith, what are your thoughts on that? Will there need to be government intervention to help industries who really struggle through this?
Again, right now, given the uncertainty that we're facing, it's hard to understand what specifically might need to be done. But again, I would definitely consider some sort of government intervention as being an opportunity by which governments could help support Canadian businesses and Canadian people. Again, if we get into a situation where the tariffs continue, if they are, again, long-standing and as wide as President Trump has suggested they will be, if we get into that situation, to me, that's one of the, again, chapters of this book that could be deployed to help us ensure that that we're supporting businesses appropriately. I can't speak specifically on Perry's comment about migrant behavior and immigration between the countries, but I think what does concern me, maybe as a business school professor as well as just a citizen, is that if the United States president wants to send a message about illegal drugs and the like, to me, he's really taken out a sledgehammer and hit a lot of people with the tariffs. Is that the proper tool to use in fixing this problem? I often liken it to if you and I have a flat tire, we go to the auto body shop and then they repair our transmission. So maybe there's a problem with drug use, but to me, this whole notion now being able to have widespread tariffs, it does send a very loud signal. But I worry people get caught up in the turbulence. People are collateral damage in this, and livelihoods are impacted. Again, more to Perry's point, if it does require government intervention, government support, that's going to add to the tax dollars that you and I are going to have to pay. Yep.
Colette from Prince Albert sent an email that I want you to pick up on as well, Keith. So Colette writes, I needed groceries this morning and gave myself extra time so that I could read labels and do some quick research before I put stuff into my cart. A store manager told me that Canadian product labels have been ordered, which will help speed up that process, but that won't be in place for a couple of weeks. I plan to be more vigilant about buying Canadian products going forward, regardless of the timeline of this chaotic stuff. So lots swirling online about which products are Canadian. You do a little bit of digging. It's actually far more complicated than you realize. My peanut butter from Costco says made in Canada, but those peanuts were not grown in Canada. So can you speak to that a bit? People want to do the right thing. They want to regain some control over the situation, and buying Canadian feels like an option.
Yeah, I appreciate and I applaud the gesture to really be genuine in this case and to buy Canadian. Country of origin labels are challenging at best, and you'd think it would be a black and white and very crystal clear issue, but it's not in terms of the labeling. Now, perhaps as we go into this, again, should this situation continue for weeks and months, maybe then we'll see better clarity. So I think that at least that will give consumers that want to buy Canadian, will give them that option. My sense is that a decision to buy Canadian, I'm not convinced that would be a way of making a wholesale 180-degree turn in the turbulence we're currently seeing.
Right. It is interesting. I just want to share another example. Miss Vicky's Chips, and I don't expect you to know everything about that company, but Canadian origins. I think there's manufacturing facilities in Canada, but the overarching owner of Miss Vicky's is Pepsi. So then I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Does this, there's clearly Canadians who are packaging these chips, but do you worry that as we try to make the best choice we can, that it's just more complicated than that?
It could be complicated, and Pepsi has a relationship with Frito-Lay. Interesting, by the way, Leisha, you say Pepsi and Miss Vicky's, because I will say, to promote the Edwards School of Business, one of our former graduates was at one time president of Pepsi Canada. Oh. She graduated in the late 1990s, Canadian, living now in the United States, working with Frito-Lay. Again, it just shows you the connectivity of maybe raw materials that are provided in Canada or a part of this nation and then processed somewhere else, packaged in another country, then shipped here. Again, perhaps the clarity in the labels will help people because, again, I applaud if there are a segment of the population that wants to make that clear, conscientious choice, at least give those citizens the opportunity of ensuring that they've got label clarity.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go to another email next. Michael writes, Pierre Poilievre is making a suggestion that the new trade partner we should be looking at is ourselves, that we need a free trade agreement between the provinces and territories. Is this idea a feasible one? That's not just coming from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. Interprovincial trade is being talked about a lot right now. What needs to happen in order to move goods more freely across provincial borders?
I think right now what I see from my business perspective, business school academic perspective, is that we are a nation, again, that has a lot of resources. I think where we lack in terms of that global competitiveness is the ability to have manufacturing. Again, we produce a lot of the inputs that might be that fabricated into products, but the ability to put them all together, to assemble them. If we were to, again, have complete interprovincial trade and relying upon one another, we'd have to have areas of this country then that can have the manufacturing and the production facilities to put together all the raw materials into finished goods that we would need. Right now, we rely upon other nations to do a lot of that production work for us.
And I know that Saskatchewan has been trying to increase the amount that we process here. That's a work in progress, but again, a long ways off from where we need to be well, I don't think we ever really could be fully self-sufficient, but...
Yeah. It's an attempt, as we say in business school, to get vertical integration, to do more of the things yourself, but you can't simply turn the switch from 0 to 60. It does take time to do that. Again, the areas of the country where we're seeing that, again, that could be an opportunity of building upon some success, but to have a complete shift in terms of us now doing everything internally, to me, I think that is a long way away.
Okay. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Chris Decker, who's the president and CEO of STEP. That's the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership. So in many ways, he is the man who tries to sell what Saskatchewan has to the world. I did speak to him just before this show today, so here is a small part of that conversation. So what are some of the markets with potential for Saskatchewan now? If we lose this relationship with the United States, I think about other relationships we have. Our relationship with China, India, has been a bit tense. You might be trying to enter markets where there are accusations of human rights abuses, political turmoil, and whatnot. Are you wading through geopolitical issues as you try to find other trading partners?
Well, I don't think we're going to lose the United States, to be sure. I mean, it is just too important. We have what they need, as we started this conversation with. That relationship will continue. How it will continue, we're going to be seeing that in the next couple of days. But there's been an overarching strategy within the provincial government here in Saskatchewan and at STEP and with all exporters to diversify away from the United States. As we mentioned, 55%. Now, that's a lot of eggs in one basket, but it is more diverse than most of the other provinces, particularly when you consider Ontario and Quebec into the 80, 85, and 90% of what they export goes into the United States. So we're already diversified, but we need to expand that. And we're doing that at STEP, and exporters are doing that. As I'd mentioned, we just got back from a diversification effort into Southeast Asia. We were in Indonesia, which is a huge economy, and one that we're going to have a free trade agreement fairly shortly, with huge growths in GDP and a big population. Vietnam is another market that we should be considering. We consider it sort of the Wayne Gretzky market because it's where the puck is going to be. We have Mexico, we have South America, we have free trade agreements with all of Europe in the EU. So there are many options to consider in this diversification strategy, and we will continue to pursue them.
So that's Chris Decker. Part of my conversation with him, he's president and CEO of STEP, the Saskatchewan Trade and Export Partnership. You'll be able to hear that full conversation on the This is Saskatchewan podcast. A new episode drops on Wednesday, so stay tuned for that. With me here in studio is Keith Willoughby, the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan. What are your thoughts on what Chris shared there? The Gretzky, Vietnam is the Gretzky.
Exactly. Go where the puck is. I think Chris makes a valuable point. This entire nation, all the provinces, they rely upon the United States for trade. Again, 77% of our exports go to the United States. But in Saskatchewan, we are the least exposed. 55%, as Chris said, of our trade. British Columbia is another one, about 57%. Other provinces, Alberta, close to 90%.
Wow.
So the U.S. is our major dance partner, but not our only one. So the ability for us now to explore those markets in Africa, in Asia, in South America, with the products that we have, I think when I see it from a business school perspective, again, if there is a bit of a glimmer for us right now, it's giving us that opportunity of seeing that there will be impacts here. But how will that be carried out in terms of a Saskatchewan situation where we are still reliant on U.S. for trade, but not as much as the other jurisdictions? I think that is an opportunity where we've seen the value of diversification for building up our economies. In terms of being able now to pivot, again, if this in the United States, if this were to be a long, drawn-out situation with really damaging impacts, the ability to pivot immediately to explore other markets, again, that does take time, but at least the groundwork has been laid. Again, as Chris said, with Vietnam or with other countries in South America and across the globe, that gives us opportunities for us to transport our goods.
I know people are seeking clarity on a number of things. So we got this email from Tony in Moose Jaw that I'll see if you can answer, Keith. So Tony writes, can someone explain specifically how tariffs are collected? For example, if a company continues sending product to the United States when Trump's tariffs take effect, how and to whom do they actually pay the tariff? Is it done at the border? If they are transporting $100,000 of product to an American destination, do they need to pay the U.S. Treasury $25,000 before that truckload of product is allowed to cross into the United States? It's a good question. I don't know how this works.
I can't speak specifically in terms of the timing of the transaction, but I can say that tariffs are like a tax. So ultimately, whether it's the U.S. government, the Treasury, they're receiving that tax. Importers are going to pay that. And I guess the key principle here is that ultimately it's borne on the back of the consumers. So think of this exactly. Think of this like a tax. Like we've had taxes in Canada for years. The United States has taxes. So think of this as an extra tax now that's borne on the back of the consumers of Canada and the United States.
And I think like Trump has acknowledged that it will impact Americans, but he's kind of saying like short-term pain for long-term gain. Is there any validity to that statement?
Again, we're so new into this that I'd say who knows. He does point to his successes in his first administration. of having tariffs, but then having inflation be relatively low. But I would counter with that by saying that was pre-pandemic, that was pre-inflationary, that was pre-interest rate situations, and the tariffs now are more widespread than the ones that were structured in his first administration. So to me, I think it's challenging, if not impossible, and irrelevant to compare this situation to what he might have done in his first administration.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of the show, so let's do some rapid-fire calls and emails. Let's go next to Clem in Saskatoon. Hello there, Clem.
Hi, Clem. Hi, Lisa and Gus. I'm not looking forward to paying higher prices at the grocery store. I want to know, why is there no relief for us under the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade? I think that's part of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Okay, Clem, thanks. Yeah, I don't know much about the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, but I'm sure you do, Keith. Do you?
I can't quote chapter and verse from the GATT, but I will say in the Trump's first administration, when there were steel and aluminum issues between our two countries, that finally the World Trade Organization, through the dispute settlement body, stepped forward and a resolution was reached. So more to the caller's point, then there are venues available that, should this escalate into situations of unfair practices, or if the World Trade Organization views this as crossing the line, then there are mechanisms in place to help.
Okay. Ken in Regina emails, I listened and read articles regarding response from our Premier Scott Moe, Premier Daniel Smith, and Western University's academic views on tariffs. They seem to be adverse to imposing tariffs. Seeing Canadian imposed tariffs is futile. But I see the two premiers locking on immigration and fentanyl are the problems, regardless of the tariffs. This fits into their frame of reference, pre-existing view, their frame of reference or their pre-existing viewpoint. Non-European immigration is undesirable, and people who use drugs are seen as a problem as opposed to having a problem where they need help. I believe Saskatchewan and Alberta premiers need to come under the fold of Team Canada in a stronger fashion. Had Premier Moe looked at maybe ceasing the export of potash to the U.S.? Will the Marshall Program in Saskatchewan stop trying to pilfer from the RCMP and weaken provincial policing? We need a rethink here. Now, Keith, I know you're not a political scientist. No. You don't offer analysis on that, but an interesting take.
But very, very broad issues, and more to the emailer's point, if one thing that we need right now in the country, it's unity. I think we need to speak with a voice in terms of we are a tenth of the population in the United States. So if we can, for our leaders, again, speak with that unified voice and the perspective, I think it gives confidence for the population. It also gives a voice that could be more prominent for the United States to hear.
Okay, I'm going to read one more email here from Roy, who writes, Donald Trump has strange priorities. Russia continues to gain ground in its war on Ukraine. The Middle East could blow up at any minute. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and the hottest 10 years on record have been the last 10. So what is Trump's top priority? Declaring economic war on Canada, America's most reliable ally and largest trading partner over the years. He clearly doesn't understand how trade balances work. A negative trade balance is not necessarily a bad thing. He also apparently doesn't care that his tariffs, coupled with Canada's retaliatory tariffs, will have very negative impacts on American consumers. He doesn't understand that no one wins in a trade war. He's breaking the free trade agreement that he signed while in office his first term. But then over the years, we've seen his word isn't worth much. All Canadian governments have talked about the need to diversify trade away from excessive dependence on the U.S. This is needed now more than ever. In the meantime, Prime Minister Trudeau's response has been right on the mark. Canada didn't start this, but we won't run away from it either. Stand strong and buy Canadian. So that's from Roy. Keith, we'll have to leave it there. I think everybody's, like I said, crossing their fingers and toes. We're running out of fingers and toes, though, to cross. So more to come, I'm sure, and we'll ask you for analysis when the time is right again. Keith, thank you.
Thanks so much, Alicia.
That is Keith Willoughby. He is the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm Alicia Gravinsky. Thanks to everyone who joined the conversation today. Tomorrow we're turning the page and we're talking about kids' books. Totally different, but something delightful. So be sure to listen here between 12 and 1 on CBC Radio 1. Do your best to have a great afternoon.